Hi, and welcome. Today, in this video, I want to talk about what is healing. What are the different aspects of it? And what are the main points, or what is the ultimate goal of healing? And there's many different ways to heal, of course. Talk a little bit about that as well. Now, whenever I think of healing, I always think of Osho, that rather eccentric Eastern guru who came over to the US for some time and stirred a lot of things up. I always appreciated his wit, his wisdom, and the way that he opened things up, let's say. Now, Osho linked the words healing or heal with wholeness, holiness, and health. And if you look at the etymology and the root of the meaning of these words, and this goes in a number of languages, they all get traced back to whole, to make whole, to be, or make something sound, which is another expression, to make it well, unbroken, or undamaged. I see healing as a way of being able to maintain a state of being, not being pulled out of it, being whole, being balanced. So I would say that healing is the process of moving back to wholeness. Okay, now, an important thing about wholeness is that we already are whole. We just haven't remembered. We have all this stuff winding us up, tying us up. And that's kind of the point of the whole game of life, is to unwind, to remember. So life is really the process of coming back into that remembrance, right? Not remembrance just as a thought, but remembrance as an actual experience. Remembering that we are one with the universe. We're an individual, but we're also part of the whole. And speaks to integration, which I'm going to talk about. So I understand wholeness is experiencing a balancing, right? Not a 50-50 balance, but a reuniting of broken pieces, bridging divides, reuniting lost or broken parts of the whole. Important aspect of this is systems thinking. And this is looking at the bigger picture, the whole system rather than just the individual, very divided or segregated parts of the system. And there are many systems out there. There's the physical system, or our physical bodies, all the different systems, the organs, the cardiovascular system, the respiratory system, our nervous system, our lymphatic system, right? And these parts of our body, they even have the name system, right, built into them. And there's our family system, our nuclear family, our extended family, our friends, if we consider them to be a family of sorts, our coworkers, our groups, all of these different larger entities that we're connected to. And there's also our sports team and our religious groups. There's the systems of society. So we're individuals within these systems, but we're impacted by the system and we impact the system ourselves. And then there's our spiritual systems. So the way that I view this, and it's a big part of how I work as a healer, is that our souls are interlinked with all these different incarnations, past, present, future, other realities, other dimensions, other realms, other worlds, other galaxies. And we often think of ourselves as an individual, and we've been taught that through media, often through our parents, our families. And so we think we're all alone. We think we're an island unto ourselves, but we aren't. Whether we recognize it, whether we accept it, whether we're aware of it, we're connected to all these vast number of systems. And all of these systems, they impact and they affect us. And we them. How we act and behave, it ripples out into the world, not just the earth, this world, but all the other worlds, all the other galaxies. It matters, not just to us, but the whole system that we're connected to. So if healing is the merging, the rebalancing of the division of the whole, right? We're bringing it back into balance. So what are some different divisions that are coming back into wholeness? So there's our divine, our eternal nature, our God spark, and then there's our more limited human self. Right? We're bridging those two divisions into wholeness. There's our left and our right brain, the logic versus the more open feeling, right? The big picture versus the details. A lot of other things going on there. I'll be making some videos about that. But we're bridging those two parts of our minds. And there's the masculine and the feminine, right? Again, often reflected in the left and right brain. There's the liberal Democrats versus the Republican conservatives, right? These two very contrasting aspects of politics and political views, but also just the way people think to organize our societies. The liberals or the Democrats, they want more. They're more the sensing, the right brain. They want equality. They want to consider people's feelings. They want art. They want they want to flow. And then the more conservatives are the Republicans. They want to look at the numbers, hard facts, right? They want order, but we can't have one or the other. It doesn't work. It's not balanced. It's not integrated. It's not whole. Becoming whole is even to do with our focus, our ability to directly focus versus a more open, inviting, focus that can take all of it in. The contrast of our tension and our relaxedness. Right? We build muscle with tension, but then we must rest and relax. The age-old story of good versus evil, good versus bad. Right? The infinite possibilities of the wave versus the specific choices of the particle. The rigid versus the chaotic, order versus chaotic. We're bridging these. Right? One isn't better than the other. Light and darkness. We need both to see. Wholeness or healing doesn't mean 50-50 balance. I'm not saying that you should become 50% feminine and masculine. I do think there's value in being open to that. Have I allowed myself to be as masculine as I can? Or is there something blocking me from that? Or even just to accept the part of me that is masculine, feels masculine, acts masculine or feminine. Right? This is bridging the divides. We have both in us. And of course, most of us have a natural tendency to be more of the other or one or the other. And there's nothing wrong with that. As we heal, we come into balance and wholeness within all the systems. Wholeness is understanding our place, right? Not as in get in line, know your place kind of thing, but what are our abilities? What are our gifts? And it's not about becoming all the same, but realizing that we're better as a whole. We're better when the systems work together, when they're not divided. Then individuality can flourish rather than keep us separate and alone. We might see this reflected in our families. There's the traditional in the past, man goes to work, wife stays home. If that's where people's hearts lie, if that's what they want, if that's what makes sense, if that's the balance, then why not? And if it's not the balance, if something else feels right, and when we become whole as individuals within these systems, then the systems can't help but become whole themselves. Maybe in our families, one person is really good at one thing, Another is good at another thing. But should everyone do everything equally? That seems like forcing in a system rather than allowing. In my experience, is allowing what's inside of us to come out, to shine, not to put it in a little box and say that this is what you should be, but owning this is what I am. And coming back to the words healing, health, holiness, the word holistic comes to mind. We often think of this as the mind, body, and soul, which are thinking of systems. There's holistic medicine and holistic healing. You know, it's a systems thinking. It's a wider view. It's considering all the things, right? In many ways, our society has moved away from holistic or systems based thinking, right? We see it especially in medicine and healing. In medicine, we've divided up the body, we've divided up our specialists, our doctors, into all these tiny little subcategories. Right? They specialize in this one thing, but they've lost the perspective of the whole person, the whole organism of the body, the mind, the energy. Go to a GP, go to your doctor for a checkup. And even their time's divided. They're laser focused. They got 6 minutes to see you. And you only get to talk about one thing. And they don't ask you questions about the other things going on in your life. That's part of the system of your life. They're not allowed to, or they haven't been trained to look at the bigger picture anymore. And the same things in mental health, right? The field of mental health. The division's right in the name. It's called mental health. Fortunately, the way that I've been trained is very systems based or holistic, and I'll talk a bit about that shortly. Being a lover of words, of the root of where words come from, the importance of the meaning of words. I often look at the word or term psychology, right? The root being psyche and lology. Lology is the study or account or discourse, right? So it's the study of something. Now, psyche, a few hundred, 400 years ago, meant soul, spirit, breath, life, mind. And we've lost that. We've confined it, we've restricted it down to mental health, one aspect of all the larger picture of what the psyche really is, right? The soul or the spirit encompasses the mental. We've narrowed the mental health just down to the brain, but the brain is only part of the mind. Right? We break it into smaller and smaller pieces. We've lost our ability to really see and bring health. But like I mentioned, I'm fortunate because I didn't go to just any school. I was trained in a school that understood mental health, looking at it from a systems perspective, realizing there wasn't just one way. So my training as a therapist has been steeped in all sorts of different systems perspectives, right? The impacts of all the systems or many of the systems have on us, like our family system, the systems of our societies, of our cultures, right? The systems or beliefs within those cultures or within those societies and the impact that it has on a person. It focuses on non-pathologizing therapies, right? Not just seeing the clients as their struggle, as their diagnosis, as their label, but seeing them as a whole person, realizing those things like ADHD or depression is just part of their experience. It's not all of them. There's internal family systems that look at the core self kind of as the center and all the different aspects that are struggling. There's a system inside of us. There's the transpersonal. We're looking at a person more than just their personality, more than their behaviors, more than their thoughts and emotions. the larger system of their being. There's the somatics, the sensations, somatic experiencing. We've gotten from Peter Levine's wonderful work. There's the work of Peter van der Kolk, how trauma lives in the body. Right? He doesn't say this necessarily, but the vibration gets stuck in the body. When we look at emotional regulation, our ability to regulate the emotional energies. There's the polyvagal theory from Dr. Stephen Porges and Deb Dana, who's helped a lot with the work. There's the modality of ADP from Diana Fosha. There's the brilliant work that's been going on for 50 or 60 years around attachment theory. And what's beautiful about all these things that I've had the fortune to study is that all these people have come together and worked together, looking at the larger picture of what's going on for people. How can we help people in therapy rather than just one view, one perspective? Dr. Daniel Siegel, I love Dr. Daniel Siegel's work. He's created the interpersonal neurobiology, which is looking at all fields of science and the impact it has on us. So when we look at systems, we start to see how they work together, right? It's not addressing this one little piece, this one symptom. It's looking at the whole picture. And it's about integration. Right? I'm going to talk about integration in a minute. It might look at a small piece without losing the perspective of the whole. Someone breaks their leg, of course, we're going to treat that as a broken leg. We're not going to necessarily use some other healing modality or medical treatment that doesn't make sense for that body part. But in the healing and the recuperation, we can look at how we can support the whole body in healing, in integrating that injury back into the wholeness of a person. Great example of systems thinking or this holistic type view of healing in the shamanism. Right? It's been around a long time. And they look at restoring balance, restoring wholeness for a person. And it views illness as disconnection from the self and from spirit. One of the core aspects of its work is bridging or reuniting lost aspects of the soul. It's about integrating the power that's within a person through connecting them with different spiritual energies or with powerful animal helpers, reminding them that that's there within them, right? Shamanism is relational. It might be with our power. It's not about fixing what's broken. It's about remembrance. It's about reminding us of who we really are. And when I think of shamanism, I often think of this article that was written. An African, West Africa, I think, shaman came to a U.S. mental hospital. They were visiting a friend, and they couldn't help but notice how different the way that the U.S. viewed health from West Africa. You noticed that they tried to suppress the symptoms, right? Just get rid of the symptoms, not address the root. He saw that these people, they needed connection, not to be isolated by themselves. He saw what they were going through as a spiritual becoming, not a breakdown, not broken, but it was actually their spiritual emergence. Often these people were gifted, and he saw that. He saw this experience as a gift, a transformation. He saw that they needed help clearing certain energies. He saw these people were overwhelmed by spiritual energies they'd never been taught to navigate. I often think our view of each other is reflected in that, especially with children. We expect them to treat us nicely. We expect them to behave. We expect all of this. But where do we expect they've learned this? Have we shown them? Have we modeled it? Often we haven't, because we're not perfect ourselves, and that's okay. But how can we expect our children just to know they should behave? And who's to say what model of behavior is right? What we say in the moment? as a parent myself, I find myself saying that. Oh, well, this is what you should do because that's what I need you to do right now. Does it make it right? A lot of the time it doesn't. But my son and I, we can learn together. I'm learning how to be a better person just through the experience, the system of being a family, through my relationships with him. Right? All the different pieces are connected to each other. Everything is a relationship. Everything is a relationship. And the shaman that came and wrote this article, they had a PhD education. And they were also an elder and a shaman. So even within that man, there was an integration of the understanding of his people and his ways, but also of our education system, our Western education system. So there was an integration. It enabled him to see a broader perspective, right? To be able to step back. So working as a multidimensional healer, there's systems upon systems. There's all the human systems that we see in therapies, but there's also how we connect to things in other densities, other dimensions, other lifetimes, higher energies, lower energies. I see the patterns or the relationship with trauma, right? That's been interwoven and holds us back. I see disconnects over thousands of lifetimes for some people. I see the ongoing pain and the unresolved patterns, the agreements we've made that don't serve us any longer, and the relationships, all in this interweaving web. It doesn't need to be fixed, it needs to be understood. Sometimes it needs to be experienced somatically, it needs to be acknowledged. Something I've realized about this multidimensional healing is it's part of the system of what we experience here as humans. So the trauma we feel here and as humans is often echoes from all those other lifetimes. And so we have experiences here to remind us, to reconnect us to that. So it's not that we have to go out and heal all of that in these other lifetimes and these other dimensions and also heal what's here because it's all connected. When we heal something here, it echoes out into all those past lives, all the way down our family systems, through our soul families. Right? When one person or one incarnation heals something, it affects the whole. What I have found with multidimensional healing is sometimes because it has such a broader, more systems whole perspective, right? It can look at the whole in a different way. Sometimes can get to the root of things much more quickly. And it has more context, it has more awareness of all the different contributing factors to a struggle that a person might be having. And that can make healing a lot quicker. And the way that I work as a healer encompasses a lot of the same systems thinking or approaches that I mentioned that I've been trained in as a therapist. There's a lot of overlap. I think when we get closer to truth, it shows up, it echoes in all these different ways through these different teachings, different trainings. So when I'm working with someone in a multidimensional healing, it's somatic, right? They need to feel the vibration, the energy that's stuck. So that's the same. I often see these aspects of other lifetimes or aspects of their mind that are struggling very similar to IFS parts work. Right? When I first learned about IFS and parts work, I immediately thought of shamanism and soul retrieval, retrieving aspects of our soul. And we don't do it through force. We do it through understanding. We understand why the original rupture was made with this aspect of us. Why is it hurting? What does it fear? What does it need? And then we can join it to come back into the group. And often, both in our multidimensional lives as well as our three-dimensional physical lives here on earth, we need supporting contrasting experiences. And what I mean by that is when we have a negative experience, like abusive parents or unsupportive parents, often what we need to balance that is the opposite experience. Someone who listens, who cares, someone who can give us the love and the appreciation that we needed then and we didn't get. And then those parts can heal. They can release what they've been holding on to and become part of the whole again. So, a few times I've mentioned integration, and I want to go more deeply into what is integration. Right? It's the balancing, it's the blending, it's the bridging. But like I mentioned before, it's not about 50, but it's about taking the individual aspects. It might be a fear. Right? We often try to make sense of what's happened to us. So if something bad happens, we use that information. Oh, I should avoid this situation. But when we integrate it, we realize that yes, it could happen again. But by holding that fear, holding on to that, it restricts us, keeps us away from a lot of wonderful things that we could experience potentially if we weren't sitting with this fear. Right? Spirit doesn't have these fears. Our souls, when they're not incarnated, don't have these fears. And as we integrate, as we awaken, these fears are nurtured. They're taken care of like a loving parent takes away our cares when we're young, and so that they can join in and become part of the whole. I was looking for a definition of integration, and it was more difficult than I expected. It's such a nuanced thing. I found it very elusive to get at least a satisfying to me definition of it, what it is. In the dictionary, I found these terms of merging, coherence, inclusion, unification, combining. I looked to Dr. Daniel Siegel, who I admire so much. He's done so much for the world and our understanding of a lot of these things. I looked at the framework inside interpersonal neurobiology, which is an organization that he started. Integration is defined or refers to the process of linking differentiated elements into a functional whole. So taking the pieces and bringing them into the whole, making it whole. It goes on to say whether, this is within the brain, within the self, or between people and relationships, right? Everything is connected, the systems of relationship. And it's not just about connection, but it's connection with distinction. So parts remain distinct. They keep their individuality, but they become linked in a coherent and coordinated way. Dr. Daniel Siegel goes on to emphasize that integration is a relationship. It's our relationship, our connection between these individual parts of ourselves or in our relationships and the larger part, the wholeness, the systems. I decided to ask ChatGPT to describe integration as if I'm a 15-year-old. And so it asked me to imagine my mind like a symphony orchestra. Each, all the different sections, there's the drums and the violins and the trumpets and the flutes. And that's like a different part of your brain or a different part of your life. So one part is your feelings, sadness, anger, joy. Another part is your body, right? Your heartbeat, your stomach ache, your sore leg. Another aspect of the orchestra is your thoughts. Thoughts like, I'm not good enough, or I got this. I'm loved. I'm worthy of love. Another aspect of the orchestra is your memories and your relationships. And then it went on to describe when the orchestra is playing well, each section knows its own part, right? And they're different and they're separate, but they also play together in harmony. Right? They're linked and describes that as integration. Then it goes on to ask, what if the drums are too loud or the violins are off and no one's listening to the conductor? No one's following the conductor. That's what happens when our minds aren't integrated. Right? Our emotions can overwhelm us. We don't know how to emotionally regulate ourselves. When that happens, then we can't think clearly and we feel disconnected. We feel alone and fear comes up. Right? We don't have the support of the group. Siegel goes on to say that integration is the key to a healthy and balanced mind. And when we're integrated, or when our brain and mind is integrated, we can stay calm under stress. We can understand our feelings without being completely overwhelmed or pulled around by them, controlled by them. We can make better choices. We can think of potential consequences of our actions, the impacts we might have on ourselves and on others. It's easier for us when we're integrated, when our brain and mind is integrated, to connect to others more easily. We're more adaptable. We're more understanding. It's less easy for us to get triggered. And one way is mindfulness, right? Or Dr. Daniel Siegel's practice called the wheel of awareness. Right? And we're learning to be the conductors of our own orchestras. We notice each part of us, we acknowledge it, we listen to it, and then we help it to work together with the rest of the orchestra. Through this, we gain emotional strength, we gain clarity, we experience peace. Now, I thought of another analogy. I recently coached my son's soccer team, and first 12 or 14 games of the season, we lost every one, some of them quite badly. And of course, morale on the team was low, and players were starting to blame each other and get frustrated with each other, and all these things that you can expect, right? When there isn't harmony, when there's disintegration within a team or a system. We were coaching them to trust each other, to trust each player to play their position. We had some players, we had a lot of strong players and then some not as skilled players. And the skilled ones would play many positions. They would try to fill in the gaps where the weaker players would lose the ball or whatever. But then they weren't there to play their own position. We're coaching them that in order to win, they had to play as a team. And to do that, they had to trust each other to play the positions. And that they might make mistakes, but only by making mistakes and learning from them would they improve, both as a team and individually. And then the last 6 games, we won 5 and we tied 1. A very different result. And it wasn't necessarily that our players were a lot more skilled, and there was a bit of that, of course. But they started trusting each other. They started working together as a team. Right? They became integrated. They entered the flow state. You can also use this analogy with business. Everyone doing their job, what they're good at. Recognizing people's skills, trusting them to do their jobs. And people aren't burning out. People feel appreciated. They feel good, anchored in what they're doing. So integration is our brain and our mind. Right? Our mind is bigger than our brains. learning to work together with itself, not against itself. And when we have that, then we're stronger, we're flexible, more, we have more wisdom. We're able to access more wisdom, that right brain, especially. So, how do we integrate? How do we heal? We can do it through intention, attention, and focus, through practice, right? Like anything, being integrated is a skill. We have to practice it, changing the neural pathways in our brains. We do it through confronting our shadows, doing shadow work, looking at the parts of us that we're not proud of, right? We create or we seek out safety, not just physical safety, but emotional and mental safety. People that accept us, people that can be forgiving or help us to find forgiveness. When we can find forgiveness, we're no longer at the whim of what's happened to us. We take our power back. We find understanding for ourselves and through other people. Empathy builds integration and healing, both empathy of us giving to other people or sharing with other people and receiving it. Love. Love is a huge part of integration. Right? We don't change things by fighting against them. Right? Integration isn't exclusion, it's inclusion. Two of my, I'll call them arch nemesis, letting go and surrender. Right? It's not giving up, it's different. It's realizing that fighting what's going on just keeps it alive. Right? Those were really difficult lessons for me. Right? We co regulate. We find someone, therapist, coach, friend, loved one, can stay in a balanced state, reasonably balanced state emotionally, even when things get emotionally charged. That helps us learn how to do it for ourselves. And we can access our spirituality, which is key to a deeper integration. We can't do that when we're ruled by fear. The fear circuits in our brains, those fear circuits need to be integrated with the higher thinking parts of our brains so that we can anchor and connect to the larger universe, right? The intelligence, the love, the wisdom of the universe, through our guides, through intuition, higher loving beings that we can connect to. Right? Integration is through vibrations, not through fighting them, using ones that support us and making peace with what we fear might overwhelm us. And vibrations also dance and music and chanting, singing. Come back to this article from the shaman from West Africa. I seem to remember some of the details of that article saying that he invited a few of the people from the US back, and how they worked to heal was including them in the community. And one example is when somebody does something bad to another person, the whole tribe, the whole community will come together and they'll sing, sometimes for days. They'll connect with that person. They'll sing about all the positive qualities, and that's balances what happened for that person that resulted in them doing this bad thing. And they don't isolate them. and they use vibration to shift the energies, whether they're energies inside the person or spiritual energies that were affecting the person. We use mindfulness for integration. If there's a key, it's mindfulness. It's the awareness of the awareness itself. It's being able to step back from all of it, looking at the bigger picture. Right? That's why meditation is so powerful. We can step back from our thoughts. We can step back from our feelings and the sensations in our bodies. And we can see them as their individual parts. We're not just our thoughts. We're not just our anger. We're not just our sadness. We're so much more. And something else about integration, a huge tool is awareness. In therapy, we call this context. When we have more information about a situation, it changes our perspective. It changes how we feel. One example of this I often give is maybe we're mad at our friend. They said they were going to call or they were going to do something for us, and we're pissed off at them. And then we speak to them. We find out they had a loved one pass. As soon as we get that more information, the greater context of what's happening for that person, most of us understand. We might feel bad. All that pissed off and frustration is gone in an instant. Once we take back and accept ownership for something, maybe that we've co created, or even just the ownership of how we feel about something, then we actually can change it because it's inside of us. It's not out there. We can't change what's out there, but we can change what's here. An important piece to this is, something I mentioned before was this integration of the bad or evil. Right? It's not about becoming bad or evil. I don't want to give that impression. Um, but it's like the shadow work, recognizing the bad things that we've done, right? And I don't even like saying that, but the negative things that we've done to people, the bad we believe we are. That was a big part of my journey, is believing all of the stuff that I'd done was bad. And there were a few things, but it wasn't nearly as big as what it seemed. So it's about looking at those things, looking at the hard truths of our actions, our past, and making peace with them, realizing that there's more to them than just the bad part. Maybe there's reasons underneath that need to be healed, that need to be brought into the wholeness. Carl Jung, so wise, one of probably the most important quotes for me in my life: what we resist persists, what we fight against stays alive. We've become such a warrior culture, which isn't all bad, of course, but we fight every little thing, especially inside of us. And we fight against the fear, we fight against the depression. That doesn't change it. It doesn't integrate it. It doesn't bring it into the whole. It keeps it separate, keeps it outside. And now I'm not suggesting that we just accept and feel everything all at once. That's a disaster. Integration happens over time. But what we resist persists, as Carl Jung said. What we fight continues to live on. And integration happens through relationships, family, friends, our relationship with some higher power, and our relationship with nature, our relationship with what we love. Relationships are key. Everything is connected. Everything is part of the system. One important question is, why do we seek healing? What brings us to this point? And often it's the opposite of what we want. It's the pain and the suffering that we seek. We want to alleviate that. We want to get rid of it. But it also fuels our journey back into wholeness, into integration. We can't really appreciate all the good unless we've experienced something hard and negative. That's not always true, but often it is. There's a quote that I love from T.S. Eliot. We shall not cease from exploration, and in the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Life is just all about the experience, coming back to this remembrance, remembering, becoming a member again of the system, the universal system. Part of that is human, and part of that is beyond our humanness. So, what does integration bring us? Right? We reconnect to that inner voice, our inner guides, our intuition, that wisdom that knows, guidance that is just for us. We reconnect with the totality of ourselves, our gifts, what we offer to the world, to others. Integration brings peace, brings more calm, more joy, more fulfilling relationships. And it's not necessarily because life changes on the surface that we experience these things, but because we've changed ourselves. So we experience and interpret the world differently. Right? The way we make sense of things changes. But once the inside changes, the outside can only follow, can't help but change. As above, so below, as within, so without. Integration means we're able to stay calm, to not be ruled by fear, to be rooted more in our flexible, understanding, adaptable selves. It means we can access our expanded selves mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And we're able to tap into all our resources, all our gifts, tap into why we came here. And we're able to bridge our human selves with our higher selves, our divine selves, and experience the vastness of the universe, all while being in a human body. One of the things, the greatest gifts of integration is self love. When we're happy with who we are, even if it's not perfect. And a lot of that's through the love of the universe, that loving parent we all craved, but most of us didn't have. Thanks for listening.